So the bios are actually already in the books. So what I was thinking would be a more interesting way to start this panel is, who was the editor who mentored you at a younger age? And what is something that they taught you that you've taken with you ever since that you still use to this day?
Take it.
Okay. Is this on? I was lucky enough to start editing in the age of film. So I got to actually work as an apprentice and an assistant to a great editor and a great guy named John Tintori. And he left editing and he went to start, he went to join the grad film program at NYU, and I think he's still there. But he was sort of naturally pedantic, and so in the old days, you would just stand next to the editor and watch them cut and literally help them and hand them pieces of film. So I watched him watch dailies. I watched him make decisions about where he wanted to be when in the scene, take a grease pencil, mark up the film, cut out pieces, hand them to me. I would hang them on a bin. I would keep track of them, and then he'd kind of go through the scene, find all his pieces, and then he'd say, okay, hand me the first piece. And then I'd hand him whatever the first piece was, the wide shot, and then we'd string it back together, and I'd watch that process happen. So that's pretty much still how I make my way through the scene, is that I watch dailies and I take notes, and I make my decisions about sort of the architecture of the scene, maybe where I want to start, where the heart of it's going to be, which performances are key, and I still make notes on paper, and then I put it back together in order from the first shot, telling myself the story. So I got to watch that process, and I also got to watch him firsthand collaborating with the director, and that was really important to watch that relationship.
Is there anything from the film room that you still use? Because we've been digital for 20 plus, 30 plus years now. So is there anything from the actual film process that you still translates to your cutting process?
Maybe a little bit, like maybe a little bit of organization. Like I think when you're on Avid or Premiere or any nonlinear system, you can do a lot of vertical editing. Your timeline can get really complicated. You could have 12 video tracks, and you could say, oh well, maybe I want this shot and this shot. And I think film helped us keep very organized. We couldn't do that. We had to pick one shot at a time. So I think I'm pretty organized and linear in my thinking about my timeline, and then fortunately nonlinear in my thinking about story, because now we can do anything, anywhere, and quickly. And also, I want to point this out, it makes me very grateful all the time that I'm on a computer, because it didn't used to be that way. And if somebody said, you know what, I want to restructure this and change every performance, we're like, oh my God, that's going to take an hour, and we have to find the pieces, and it was hard to be patient. So if people ask me to make massive changes and do a lot of restructuring, I'm fairly poised and confident, and I always have in mind how we're on a computer. I can save, I can duplicate my sequence, I can make a million versions. It's not destructive. So
whenever I'm teaching a class, I always, when we showing them the effects and stuff, and they complain about the render, and I'm like, we used to draw on with grease pencils, yeah. And then you would send it out for a couple days.
Yeah.
Or not, if you didn't have the budget for it, you just drew it on.
Right.
So how about yourself, Leo?
Well, mine is a little different, because I honestly never had a mentor. I started, I just wanted to work anywhere in the business, and my first job I had was as an apprentice sound editor. I would go around this back when in the Brill building they used to have all the different floors where they do all the films, and I just haunted that place until somebody finally, took pity on me and gave me a job. And it was as a sound assistant, and I spent 7 years as a apprentice, then an assistant sound editor, and then as a sound editor. And the mentor for the sound editor was two people, actually, an editor named Peter Odebashian and another editor named Bruce Kitzmeyer. And what was really helpful for me is I learned about what you can do with sound, in order to just, create things that aren't necessarily on in the picture, and also a discipline that these guys had, because especially here in New York, the sound editors were really, I mean, they were, there was nothing sloppy about it. I mean, they were very, very hardworking and disciplined, and that was a really great, it turns out for me, a really great entree into this business. And then I finally got a chance to edit a film. The first 3 I did was also on film, and I begged this director, to give me a shot at it, and kept calling him and bothering him, and finally he just said, okay. I learned later that he really wasn't interviewing anybody, and I was the only person who was asking for the job. So I did that, so the only thing I can say as far as, I was one of the kids who always made little films and was editing, and I used to go to rock concerts and, move my way to the front when you were able to do that without getting crushed, and just shoot lots of 8mm film, and then sit in my bedroom and cut it together. And I think
which concerts, we got to find out who
okay,
the rock stars are here.
First, this is how old I am. Rod Stewart and Faces. Let's see, who else? Elton John, The Who, T-Rex.
Some great.
Yeah, David Bowie when he was doing the Young Americans tour. Alice Cooper. So by doing that, I think somehow I was learning about continuity. Because I would just I would shoot a roll of wide shots, and then and the Rolling Stones. I would shoot a couple of rolls of wide shots, a couple of rolls of close-ups, and the different performers and stuff, and then in the room just put together, in making it look like it's all connected, and then just watching a lot of movies. I think I'm always learning from even things like the James Bond movies. I would watch the supplements, and they were talking about Peter Bart and how he would jump people across a room or something, and that was really like, oh, that's really interesting. You can, you don't have to watch them walk all the way across the room. You can just, cut to a different angle, and they're already halfway across the room. Things like that, pardon me, things like that kind of just stayed with me. So it's just been like that,
Everyone forgets the Rolling Stones. So
I know. I don't know how I could forget the Rolling Stones.
So let's jump into television, because that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
And Josh mentioned binge watching, I think, Fleabag. So do you think the way the streaming services are now sort of demanding everything up front and ready, how has that affected you guys in the edit suite? How is binge watching, or this viewer sort of new take on watching shows, how has that affected you guys in the cutting room?
I don't know that I have had any, it has affected, however long the process is, that's how long it is.
How about yourself, Kate? Because you worked on Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and that was for Amazon.
Yeah, I think that might be the first show I worked on that dropped all at once. So, I mean, on our, like our day-to-day doesn't really change. We have, we have a deadline so that they have to get out at, a certain month or day or whatever, and then we just have to back into it. So to make sure that production starts, and we keep post-production going, just like we always do in television, because we have to make air dates. It's just that we do have to deliver them all at once, but we have to finish them on a schedule, because you've got to turn them over to sound and mixing and all the things that have to happen in the process. But I was thinking about this question earlier, and I think the only thing that affected me in terms of story was going from the pilot of Mrs. Maisel to episode 2 of Mrs. Maisel, which I cut. I didn't cut the pilot, but I did episode 2 and followed it. And Amy Sherman Palladino wrote and directed both of them. And what happened was they did a pilot, and they put it on Amazon Prime, and you could vote on it. This is when they had that thing going, and people seemed to love it. And so they said, okay, we're going to make a show. But then it was almost a year later before you got to see any more episodes. So she decided to repeat the last minute of the story of the pilot, and that was the beginning of episode 2. And I just questioned whether that was a good idea, because it seemed like a recap, and if people are going to binge it, they're going to literally just see the same thing for 5 minutes later, or 12 seconds later or whatever, however it advances, but we ended up, she won the argument as she usually does. And but we put like a little, fade up and like a laugh track. We modified it slightly, but I did question the story because if you're just going to watch it, if you watched it one week and then the next week, it would make total sense. It's also a little bit of my pet peeve that people don't watch the credits and listen to the songs that we choose at the end of the episodes. And we spend a lot of time like choosing those songs to complement the episode and take you out with a certain feeling and line up the credits so that they match. And nobody knows how to undo that default setting, right? So it's just like, whether you want to or not, it's going to show you the next episode right away. And one more thing about streaming is it's working on television. It's really fun to be part of, let's say a 12-week national conversation where people are recapping and talking, and you're like having water cooler conversations Monday morning. That's not happening with binging. So they drop all at once. You've got like a glorious week, and then there's something else, right? So.
Well, there's too much stuff now. Well, and one of my biggest pet peeves is that between seasons there's a year usually, and you binge watch everything, and then they don't give you a recap for the next season, and I find that very frustrating. Just because it's been a year since I binged it. So we've come into this new era where it's very cinematic in the television shows that we're seeing. And so have you seen a change in how the timing and pacing of shows? Has anything shifted in that regards for you guys? Have things gotten slower or faster?
I don't know about pacing, but definitely in the way things are shot. I know that on True Detective, for example, they were really concerned about not, of staying in some shots wider, and making sure that the shots themselves were very cinematic, and there were some scenes that maybe they would say there were too many close-ups. They didn't want it to be like just a whole lot of tight shots. So they were very concerned about it looking, having a more of a cinematic look to it, than normally, because things are on larger TVs now. People have 55-inch TVs, so it's not like things have to be close up the way it used to be when it was the old RCA or something.
Or they're watching it on their phone.
That's true. Yeah.
So you never know.
I know.
Does anyone here actually watch on their phone their shows? Wow, it's actually surprising.
I see people in the subway every day watching on their phone.
Well, I think we should get into our clips, and we're going to start with yours, Fosse, Verdon. So can you set us up for this clip? What's happening here?
Sure. So Fosse Verdon is the story of Bob Fosse and his wife, Muse, and collaborator Gwen Verdon. And this is an 8-part miniseries that just finished on FX. And what we're going to see is a clip that follows. It's episode 2, and Bob and Gwen have just met, and they've just gone through a rehearsal, rehearsal steps for Damn Yankees that they're going to stage together. But they're kind of getting to know each other, and they're kind of flirting. And so this is what happens after Bob comes home.
So what was the challenge of editing that sequence?
So many challenges. Well, I wanted to show this because I think it was one of the keys to unlocking how to tell Fosse Verdon. Like, what kind of style were we going to have? And, the script was written in a pretty straightforward fashion. It was not written to be intercut between Bob and his wife and Bob and Gwen rehearsing. So that was something that we found when we were editing. And also the rhythm of intercutting once they go to bed and you see all the kissing and the making out and everything, that was just written in a simple way to be like, they fall into bed together and passionate things happen. So the first thing that I realizes that's going to be boring. Unless you try to cut it up in little pieces, it's not going to feel very passionate, because it was just like 2 hours of Sam Rockwell and Michelle Williams making out. So, we pick little interesting pieces, and then I naturally started to intercut them together with the rehearsal. So that was one of the first steps. And then showed it to the producers, and they kind of pushed me even further and said, okay, but what, and at the same time that I'm doing episode 2, Tim Strito's doing episode 1, and they're also finding rhythms and ways to intercut scenes and fold them together. So that we sort of started to play off of each other and say, okay, we're going to start to fold scenes together, and we're also going to use some of the rhythm of the music to really make it punchy. So as many of those kind of cutbacks and forth that I started with, they pushed me to do them, do even more of them and use the rhythm of the song. As the rhythm of the song built, the cuts got quicker and shorter, and that then became kind of a style that everybody picked up on and continued with.
Well, you mentioned that someone else was cutting episode 1, someone else was cutting another episode. So how did you guys work as a team to figure out this structure?
Yeah, everyone asks me, like, working on television, how do you reconcile style and tone among different editors and different directors? And this was one of the biggest challenges of all, because we had to figure out how to tell this story, what was going to be the style and the tone, and we had to do it really fast without doing a pilot first. Right, because that's usually how you figure it out, is you do a pilot, you work on that like it's a little movie, and then you go ahead and everything is supposed to kind of look somewhat like that. But Tim and I would just show each other what we were working on. And I think that we were all, huge Bob Fosse movie fans, and huge Alan Hyme fans. And we knew, it was going to be stylish, and it was going to be fun and rhythmic, and so we were just trying to find different ways. So we would, we'd show each other sequences, and then the producers would come in and they would go from one room to another, and they would give us notes, and it just kind of started to come together in similar ways.
Can you, I guess, share with everyone who Alan Hyme is, for those who don't know, and did you guys ever reach out to him?
We didn't. Alan Hyme is still working. He's a brilliant, famous editor who we all look up to. He cut one of the greatest movies of all time, All That Jazz. Worked with Bob Fosse on that. Before that, he worked with Bob on Lenny. And I think before that, Liza with a Z was a TV special, and that's where they met. So they worked, I think, on, and then Star 80 after All That Jazz. So, and they spent, famously years cutting All That Jazz. But it's a masterpiece, and we couldn't possibly copy it, but we were inspired. We were very inspired by it. But I didn't feel that it was necessarily my place to reach out to Alan Hyme. I'd met him once, but we were doing our thing.
Now, you also mentioned that you took other scenes and restructured or created this sort of cross-cutting. How did that affect the rest of that episode, essentially? Because you're moving scenes away, and you might have times that you have to meet or, set schedule, basically, for each episode. So how did you restructure the film or each episode to make sure it matched?
Oh, yeah, you mean time in terms of running time, like having to fit a target time? FX was pretty liberal with our target time. I mean, as long they were willing to let it run over an hour per episode. That's pretty unusual for a network, but we weren't really inhibited by time constraints that way. I think every episode is a different length. Some fill almost an hour and a half of network time with commercials. So it wasn't. I mean, we had to figure out if the story still made sense, and moments played, but that wasn't really a problem. Yeah.
No, this question might be for both of you, but how does the actor's performance influence or inspire you or dictate how you make the cut, especially in something like this where, Bob Fosse is pretty legendary, and we all have heard the stories about him. So how did the acting influence your cuts?
I'm just doing all the talking.
Oh, that's okay.
I mean, these actors were really consistent, and that's true also if we end up talking about Mrs. Maisel. But I mean, we're really lucky. Like, we didn't have to find a performance for Gwen Verdon or Bob Fosse. Like, this is what they did. I was, I would like to try to find among the range of things that Sam Rockwell did. I would look for things that had more energy. I think he tended to play it in a very laid-back way. So I was attracted to performances where he was kind of giving more energetic, more active. I think Michelle Williams she was just great, no matter what. Yeah.
Now, because he was such an epic dance choreographer, did you find that affected your rhythm and timing in the editing process?
We definitely wanted to find places to use music to accentuate editing, and that's not always what I tend to do, but I think that was what was called for. And we also had, we had this incredible team from Hamilton that was on. So Tommy Kail was our director, and he directed the stage play of Hamilton. And Andy, I'm going to make his name Blunkhauer. I don't know. He was the choreographer for Hamilton, and he was our choreographer. So they were really attentive to the dancing and the performances. At one point, our post-producer said, I think Andy's going to come in and sit with you and make sure all the dancing's vetted and everything looks perfect. And I was like, oh no, that's just going to take forever. But it ended up not happening. So we sent him cuts. He looked at it. There were a couple of movements, her hand movement shouldn't be on the beat. It should be on the back beat or something like that. So like little corrections, but I think most of the work was done on set.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So now, as you mentioned, you've been doing a lot of talking. So let's jump to you, Leo. Can you set up True Detective for us?
Yeah,
your clip.
for the clip.
Yeah.
If for the people that haven't seen it, the main story is about Mahershala Ali plays a detective named Wayne Hayes, who he and his partner, played by Stephen Dorff, they come across a missing children case that they've never been able to solve, and there have been a couple of people who've been targeted as the perpetrator, and they're mistaken. Anyway, he's been obsessed for decades about this case that they were never able to solve, and for the first 5 episodes, everything is taking place in his memory as he's remembering things. He's in the early stages of dementia, and he's both remembering things, and he's also being interviewed for a sort of a Dateline show called, I forget what it was called, not True Detective, True Criminal, that's what it was. So anyway, in this clip, he's been demoted there's 1980, it takes place in 1980, 1990, and 2015. And in this clip begins in 1990. He's been demoted because he had told, his wife had started writing a book about the case that he's resented because his wife was actually going out and doing interviews, and basically he felt doing his job. And early on, he started giving her information about the case, that when the police found out, that there was an article in a newspaper that she wrote with information that only he could have told her, he was demoted, and because he wouldn't throw her under the bus. So anyway, this begins in 1990 at the end of an argument that started because of his growing resentment of how well she's doing at getting information about the case. And that's about, I think, all we have to say at this point.
All right. So what was the challenge of that sequence?
The challenge was everything that takes place downstairs was actually shot in a practical location, a real house in Arkansas. and everything that takes place upstairs was shot over 2 different time periods on a stage. They had stages in Arkansas, and so the interesting thing was when I got the dailies of older Mahershala at the top of the stairs, there had been such a long passage of time between what they shot in the practical location that there was a miscommunication, and the art department had created the wrong staircase, and so when I cut it together, the other thing was they didn't provide a step up, so that it just began with Mahershala standing still, and when they called action, he looked around and said, "Where's my family?" and all that. So first thing was, it's 2 different staircases. There's a huge iron, thing, wall hanging that's behind him as an old man. But that's easy enough. We'll just, visual effects, we'll get rid of it. And so we just gave it to visual effects. And every time they sent it back, which was only about 2 or 3 times, but it was like they got rid of everything, and they made the staircase, the top of the staircase look the same, but there was something wrong. I just didn't know what it was, and I just said, for some reason, it just doesn't feel like it's the same, it doesn't feel smooth. And what I realized was that the pictures on the wall were different too, and so they were trying to match. They were so concerned about trying to match where the pictures were that the rhythm of him, since he unfortunately wasn't actually stepping up to the top of the staircase, it looked phony. And then I thought, it doesn't really matter, because we're doing this effect, as the lights are going out. So I don't know that it matters that the pictures on the wall aren't the same. And so I just asked him to give me the B side, without the wall hanging, and leave the pictures alone. And I just found the first take that he did as an old man. Fortunately, he rocked a little bit. And so I thought, okay, if I just try to find a place where that matches his movement, and then just do a little 3-frame dissolve, that's all it took. So that was the biggest challenge of trying to not make it look, not make it bump for you when he finally reaches the top of the steps and.
Well, it's such a fascinating tonal shift. Like, it's
Yeah.
really well done. So what goes into, I guess, manipulating tone for the audience in a scene like this? Like,
I don't see. They actually shot. Well, what they did was, of course, the downstairs, the argument, everything up until he walks up the steps was shot in one place, and the second part they shot was when he was sitting in the bed, and she was reading from Jungle Book, and the third part, of course, was, and these were all done, like, one was like several weeks or a month apart, and then the other one was a couple of weeks apart. It was when he was the old man searching around and looking for them. So that's, I don't know that there was anything that I was just following the story. I don't know that there was anything that that there was anything about the tonal shifts that was all there in the script.
Now, you've got this character in the scene twice.
Yeah.
Was there any issues or anything with having this actor in twice that you had to sort of work with, or any?
I'm not exactly sure.
Well, you have him as an older man, and you have him as a younger one.
Yeah.
So you're working a lot to sort of merge them together. And like you said, there was such a distance between when they shot the two. Was there any?
Yeah, no, it really just, no, it came together pretty easily, except for that little technical glitch, at the top of the stairs. But yeah, no, that was the issue through the entire show, was because they what they would plan to do with each block, each like, for the first 2 episodes, they'll do all of the 1980 material first, and then, you know, if there's a 1990 material, they'll do that, and then they'll save the old, you know, so that Mahershala didn't have to, because of the makeup too, so they didn't have to keep going back and forth. And, you know, today you're young Mahershala, you know, tomorrow you're old Mahershala. So that they originally had planned to do all of the old man material at the very end, but there were, for lots of reasons, that that never happened, and so they did have to jump back and forth. But so that's why there was, you know, there were scenes where, you know, in the beginning there would just be lots of slugs. You know, this is what happens. This is what's going to happen when they finally shoot it. You know, and all that kind of thing. So you'd just be, I'd have plenty of scenes that were in various stages of completion until we had the.
How do you deal with pacing in something like that? If you've got a bunch of slugs in, that's like, this shot will be here in a month. Or
Well, it's just, you know, well, you just know that, you know, it's you take it up to a certain point, and then with the slug, you know, you keep it on long enough so that when you're watching the scene, it doesn't, you know, you don't have it just a real quick thing. You just keep a little bit of a pace, and then, but you just know that the scene, you know, it's not going to be finished until I have all the material. So, you know, and fortunately I was, you know, I did all of the episodes, so that made it a little bit easier for me, because, you know, it wasn't that I had to, you know.
Now I have one question before we get into the Q&A with the audience here, and I'm wondering, you know, and this is for both of you, but we've been, you know, in the landscape of television where these shows are really high quality, really unique and challenging and entertaining, and I'm wondering, where do you guys think the future of television is going?
That is a very hard question. I have no idea.
I don't have no idea.
No?
I think that, I don't know. I went to the Television Academy website. It said there were over 700 programs eligible for the Emmys this year. It's just too many. I don't know. I have no idea where it's going, but it's not stopping.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. Well, I think it's, I don't know, yeah. It all depends on whether Disney buys up everything. You know, because ultimately then it'll just be one place, you know, just one-stop shopping. But you know, we were talking about earlier is that there is so much out there that I feel really bad that I can't. Not that I can't watch everything, but also that there are things that is, you know, you're going through Netflix and it's like, what the hell is this? I never even heard of it. You know, I've interviewed for jobs and not gotten it. You know, the feature. You know, and then, you know, I never hear of it. And then one day I'm scrolling through Netflix and, hey, there it is. You know, and there was no. You know, they didn't get any kind of you know, a premiere, no review or anything. It just sort of they throw it up there, and I think it's a shame. I mean, I'm ambivalent about it because it's great that there's so much work. Right. You know, it's really nice that there's so many opportunities for people. But I feel bad for somebody who, you know, works on a show for 8, 9, 10 months, and then it just kind of disappears, you know, into the ether, you know.
But maybe that show has a niche audience that we don't know about. I mean, my kids or other people, you know, tell me about things and they're totally dedicated to them, and I've either never heard of them or it's pretty far down on my list. But I will say that, I mean, I think you feel the same way. Like, no matter how many shows there are, like, the show you're working on is the most important thing, and even though there are 700 other shows, the quality of what we're doing, I mean, we're fortunate to be associated with HBO or now Amazon or whatever. These companies put a lot of money into these episodes and give us quite a lot of time to make them really beautiful and make them cinematic. That's so yeah. I don't know where the future's going, but I mean, I'm lucky that I'm where I am. Yeah, now, and that I got to ride the wave of like an earlier kind of golden age of television, whatever you wanted to label it, when HBO started and television really became very popular. Production became really popular in New York, and I happen to be here, so I'm still going to seek out those shows.
Oh yeah, but I do. I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic or anything, but I really do think that the theatrical experience is kind of on its way out. I mean, you got Martin Scorsese doing, the Netflix movie. I mean, they'll give him a couple of weeks, theatrical run, but basically it's going to be, there's going to be so much more material that people are watching on television.
So my big takeaway is to invest in Disney.
Disney, that's it. Get that.
And where's this company? So now, you guys have been very generous with your time here, but we want to open this up to the
Sure.
crowd because I'm sure they have tons of questions for you guys. So anyone with questions, I can't see anyone, but all right, let's start. Oh, is there someone with a mic? Nope. I'll just come down.
It is hard.
Here we go. We'll start down here.
We can't see anything.
Thank you. In the case of Fosse Verdon, you spoke a lot about the music. I guess I was curious, with the dance sequences, obviously that music would have to be in the room when they're recording, so they're synced to it. But in other cases, like composed music, how do you work with a composer with your scenes? Are you using temp tracks and then bouncing it to them? Are you kind of just setting the pace yourself and then they are kind of matching to your pace?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the project. On Fosse, we were working with temp music, some music versions that were instrumental versions of, like a slow version of Cabaret, for example. I think that made it into my episode. So we were given like a small list of kind of vetted through our composer things that we could start with. Sometimes they don't limit you. I mean, I'm kind of stammering through this. This was a bit unique because they did want to sort of limit us to some things that they were already considering, so that we didn't have like everything at our disposal. So that worked out pretty well. So we temped with what they gave us. Sometimes I couldn't find anything. I asked our music supervisor, maybe you can throw me some more stuff. I need some more stuff like this to support a particular scene, or I don't have anything with like enough tension in it. So then they'd find some more, temp tracks for us. And then Alex Lacamoire was the composer, Hamilton, pianist and arranger and composer. So he actually went back and looked at the temp and then actually scored it. And I think episode 4 was entirely scored with songs from Pippin, but he orchestrated and performed those as well. Yeah. But in mostly on a movie or a TV show with score, the editor will put in temp score to set the mood and the pace and the tone, and then the real composer will come in and recreate it. And then sometimes you've got an ongoing TV show where you've got 3 seasons worth of composed music from that, and you're on season 4 and you'll just pull from that bin. And sometimes you'll just use that stuff, and sometimes they'll redo it.
The music on Mrs. Maisel, I actually listened all the way through the end credits. I was maybe one of the few people who had to do that. And it's great on Amazon because you can stop and actually read the what the song is, where the record came from, and all that. It's a period piece, but your use of music from the period is in a style that's not of that period. That's a very modern use of music on a period piece. What was the thinking behind that and the choices that were made there?
Yeah, you mean just the end credit song is a modern song.
Yeah, the end credit is modern song,
Yeah.
but you had things from shows, Broadway shows and stuff. Some fairly esoteric choices there, but used in the scenes and bridging scenes in a way that you wouldn't do in a 1959 movie.
Yeah, I think they're kind of loose, except for the end credits. Amy and Dan are pretty loose with the exact year of the music. Let's say, You're in Paris was composed in, 1960, but we're in 1959. That's okay. We're gonna, take some liberties. Like on Boardwalk Empire, we would never do that. It was incredibly strict. Some other things, period pieces I've worked on, you could never go outside of have any anachronism whatsoever. But the thinking on the end credits is that, Amy started the pilot, and it ended with, shoot, I forgot the song, but it ended with a modern, like 80s, kind of 80s dance song. And I think she intentionally wants to signify that we're still, that this is still these themes are still contemporary and relevant. And even though we're looking at the past, we're also talking about the present. We're talking about women's roles in the past. We're really talking about women's roles today. She's given a lot of interviews, and so I can quote her and say, like, what Midge is going through, I think a lot of women are still going through that. And so I think she wants to make it feel a little more universal, and not kind of just stuck in the period.
I think we had a question over here.
Yeah, thanks. This is for Leo. I believe you edited a movie called Amongst Friends.
Oh, yeah, that was
that
the
correct?
first one, yeah.
Yeah, because I went to a screening. It was in Columbus Circle with Rob Weiss.
Oh, yeah.
And I spoke to you about it.
Oh,
and
really?
You told an interesting story about how you had taken over the cut from another editor.
Yeah, there was...
and
yeah.
that you made a copy of the film before you recut it.
Yeah, well, there was the sound editor asked to be the editor.
Ron Kalish.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so when I had heard that they weren't happy with how things were going, that's when I started calling Rob, and then he asked me to do to take over the film. So I really had my assistant like take it apart, really, and what do you call it, reconstitute the dailies, which was really a big job. But I also made a copy of what he had done, just in case they liked something, just as a reference, in case they wanted to say, But that was never something that we used as a reference. But I did, make a little video copy of that.
Yeah, to show what the difference is.
Yeah. No, I know. Well, at that screening, it's really funny because you were talking about the grease pencil marks to make the dissolve, and that was the thing, because there would be these long dissolves that I wanted to have, and then you always get the questions at the end where it's like, is that going to be in the final film, that wiggly line? It's like, so
They all sounded like that. Every single one of them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Turned out it was one guy.
One guy.
We have. Oh, there's back there.
Back where?
Right there. I can't see to the back, so I apologize if I'm missing you. There's a waving hand back there too.
Should I go?
Yeah. You can go. We'll work.
I'm sure you'd both agree that collaboration is a big part of what you do. Can you talk about any keys that you have to navigating difficult collaborations, challenging or very difficult?
I don't think that happens in the cutting room.
You mean collaboration among editors or with directors, or both, I guess? More with directors. Directors they can be difficult. I mean, we're not always in this business because everybody's super nice and easy to get along with. They're really passionate and they need their story told, and they're not always able to communicate exactly what they want to say on film or even to us, and it's our job to try to translate what their intent is. And it helps to be as patient as you possibly can. And I guess I learned from watching John Tintori that you have to have the director's ear. It's essential. So you can sort of be patient and wait until there's an opportunity to say your opinion, and if that is not met with enthusiasm, take a step back, try again later if there's another opportunity. And I think this is really important. If someone has an idea and you don't agree that that's a good idea, don't say that. You really need to start with yes, or answer with yes. And it's important to keep the conversation going and not shut somebody down if they say, I think we should tear this apart, and I think we should put scene 16, and let's start with scene 16 and let's see what that looks like. And you think that's really a bad idea. You probably shouldn't say, I think that's a bad idea. You should try to take a breath and think about it, and maybe it's not a bad idea, or maybe it'll lead to something else that is an interesting idea. But the quickest way to figure it out is just to do it, and do it with grace and patience, and then be part of the discovery and the collaboration. But there's really no other way to do it. And then also remember that you're not on film, and you can just put it right back. And it'll just take like 5 seconds to do.
Do you have any pointers for us to?
Oh no! It's you know. I mean, sometimes it's just a personality thing. You know. I mean, you either get along with somebody, or sometimes it's just tough, and you have to grit your teeth and do the best you can. Everything you said is absolutely right. But I've had situations where, the director is just very, very defensive, and whatever you do, they feel somehow that if you have an idea that you're somehow taking something away from their control of the cut, and I've been in situations where the director, we were talking about this earlier. I've been in situations where the director loved me on this job and hated me on the next job. I mean, it was just I don't know, and I have no idea what changed. I mean, I think I was the same, but everything went so well last time. Why is it that nothing I do is right? So. And it's some, and I just learned sometimes it's never going to get better.
Sometimes it's just a bad day.
One day. Oh God, there's always a bad day. There's a number of bad days. But I mean, sometimes you're just not in sync, with the director, and whatever you're doing, you're just not. Whatever is going on with them, I don't know what it is, and you're just, it's never going to get better. I mean, as I was saying to you guys backstage, I mean, sometimes, the big problem is trying to, make it work with somebody who you're just not in sync with, and I've made that mistake, when it should have been like, what, this is not a good situation, and you should probably get somebody else,
It's hard. I just want to add, it's hard with inexperienced directors
Well,
too,
yes.
and because we work on episodic television, we meet a lot. We meet director after director, and sometimes we are kind of the keepers of the show. So we work with directors, and then we work with producers. The directors go away, so we have to be incredibly patient with the director, working out some of their ideas for about a week, and then we work with the producers after that. But sometimes you get in a little bit of a spot when you want to advise a director about the style and tone of the show, and they want to go in a different direction, and that is just not going to fly. You're not going to keep that. You're not going to keep a jump cut or a design. We just don't do that on the show, or put a piece of music in there like that. That's just not in the style of the show. So it's at that point it becomes you're trying to help them make and deliver the best show that they can to the producers who hired them, and that gets a little sticky sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that's the good thing about when you're working on a series with different directors, because you could just grit your teeth and say, well, you're going to be out of here in 4 days. So, I'll do whatever you want.
Just 4 bad days.
All right, there was someone way in the back there. There you go.
You touched briefly on time constraints on episodes, and we also talked a little about the future of television. I'm curious if either of you or anybody in the room has heard of Quibi, which is Jeffrey Katzenberg's $2 billion effort to focus on 10-minute episodics, which is supposed to launch in the first quarter of next year. If you haven't heard about it, what are your thoughts, having worked on 30, 60, 90, 100-minute episodes, about 10-minute episodics?
I don't know. I just read about it this morning. I think there was an article about, is it Paul Feig? Is that how you say his name? Is
Paul Feig?
Yeah, is going to be doing some things, and someone else, I don't remember. But it's all new to me, so I don't really know what I don't know. I'm trying to imagine what a 10-minute.
Well, I've enjoyed interesting webisodes that are somewhat episodic, or like High Maintenance, when it first came out, it was a web series. Broad City was a web series. I think that can have like really short, high quality, interesting things out there. But I'd like people to focus their attention for a while. I mean, I'd like people to get invested and kind of, that's what we do.
I think it's been around because I think about Nirvana the band, the show, which has been around, was 10 years ago I think by now, right? And now they just got a show, so it's been around. The 10-minute episodic. It's just now we have someone who's going to be like, here's a ton of money, do what you want.
Right. I mean, I couldn't imagine a fourth network way back when Fox started. So what do I know?
But in a way, isn't that really just the same as what they used to have at, every studio used to have a shorts division, I mean, that's what, the Three Stooges and, all those,
Three Stooges wasn't really episodic.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Do we have more questions in the audience? We got a couple down here.
I know we touched a little bit on editing style, but I was kind of curious how you guys might differ and how you approach editing a scene. I don't know if that.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. I'd like to hear how you approach it.
Let's throw it to Kate.
We met a few years ago on this panel, but we haven't actually worked together.
No.
So I mean, I'd be able to answer that more clearly if I were talking about Tim Strita or Jonah Moran, who was one of the other editors of Fosse or something, but I'm not sure. I feel like, you have a classically trained background.
Yeah, no, I
Make it
I
sound
don't
like
really know.
ballet.
It's funny because I'm kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Schizophrenic kind of thing, where at the same time I kind of ignore the director while I'm working on it, because otherwise then I'm just a pair of hands, if I'm just looking at the notes and saying, okay, do this, then, then I can't, I like to respond to the material. I have a very, I think maybe unorthodox way. I get in the editing room about 6 a.m, and that started just because of traffic in Los Angeles, that I just was like, I figured I should just get up at 5 and, leave at 5:30, 5:45, and then, I'll be in there quickly. But then I began to enjoy those few hours of nobody being around, and it also psychologically made me think, I could just kind of dick around for a while, and nobody's coming in till 9 anyway. So, and I don't eat lunch either. So, because once I get into it, I start. I don't like to break. I mean, I'll take a little break just to, but I kind of don't know where the hell I'm going in the beginning. I just kind of watch all of the footage. I mean, I see what kind of, like, let's say, for a scene, I'll say, okay, what are the angles I have? What did they give me? And so I see what I have here, and then I just start responding almost as if I was a storyboard artist or something. It's like, okay, let's start here, and then let's go here. Do I have that? I don't know. And I just, I do lots of paint myself into corners and then go back out, and I just kind of do this kind of Jackson Pollock-y kind of. I'm just gonna just keep doing things until I'm till it feels right, and. So that's and then the director comes in and changes it all. So not all the time, but
So how would you describe your style of editing then?
I don't think I'm so Jackson Pollock.
No.
I think I'm actually, because I was kind of trained with a lot of writer-directors who really want to see every single thing they wrote there on the screen. I think I'm pretty faithful to the script the first time through, and I'm completely willing to throw it away. But the first time, I'm pretty careful.
Oh yeah, no,
about getting it there.
I'm not. I just so I'm not misunderstood. I always do everything that's in the script. It's just as far as cutting to what, when, and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, sometimes if I'll look in the script notes and they say this is the preferred take. Of course, I'll use that, but then if I liked a take that I thought was a little better, I'll do an alternate version with that take, and so because you can make so many different versions of it. So yeah, when I say I ignore the director, I just mean, I think in some ways you have to, I'm speaking for myself, but I mean, you have to sort of like take possession of the material and really make it yours for that. The most important period for me is the assembly, the first assembly, because once the director comes in, then I don't have the same freedom that I do. But while they're shooting and I'm putting, the assembly day. I hate calling it the editor's cut because there are things I would like to lose, and I
Right.
don't, out of respect. But I think that little period there during the assembly is, for me, where most of the ideas are coming. As far as I just really respond to the material, and it's just really exciting, and I put it all together. And I think I think it's a positive thing for the director to possibly see to see it. Maybe in a way that he hadn't conceived it or whatever, And and again, it's not. That's what I mean about the schizophrenic part. Then when the director comes in, then it's like whatever whatever you want. But I kind of feel like I did my version of it, and maybe there's something there that they like, and because then once the director comes in and takes over, it's kind of hard to, as you're saying, it's kind of hard to say, well, no, don't you think we should try this? And because then maybe there's a chance they get a little defensive. But if they see it,
Right.
then they might say, I like, and it happens quite a lot. They'll say, I like that little thing you did,
Yeah.
I don't like that, I don't like it, but I like that.
Oh yeah, they say, I didn't imagine it that way. But,
Right,
But,
yes,
but
yeah,
let's
exactly.
take that and
Yeah,
that and
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But that is, I love that. I mean, that part of the job when you're alone and something, it takes a few days of dailies on an episode,
Yeah.
and it kind of clicks.
Yeah.
And you
yeah.
kind of, and you have you develop a relationship.
Yeah, but in some way you have to sort of pretend you're the director for a little brief fantasy moment, there, where it's like it's yours, and yes, then I'll go here.
Let's give a hand to Leo and Kate again.